So it's really true that for years, poor people in America have been trained to look sideways at the enemy instead of looking up, right? That's just a fact. That was true in Mississippi during the Freedom Summer. It's true today, right now, in rural towns all across America. It's true. Where the hospital's closing, where the water's drying up, where half the country still thinks that the problem is the migrant family or somebody on food stamps or whatever. That's not patriotism. That's political hypnosis. So in 1964, the Freedom Summer kind of existed to help the black citizens in Mississippi register to vote, build these freedom schools and all of this, and really challenge a system that had them locked away and locked them out of democracy. And they used, there was violence in this, there was paperwork, there was terror, there were fictitious warrants by people from everybody from the Rotary Club making accusations against people. I mean, there was all sorts of stuff, including good old courthouse corruption. And then there was a little bit of a shift, okay? Because underneath all of this, there was an economic war that was really going on. And I think if we look at this today, we can see traces of this in our society about how rural Southerners are being used in this fight to divide us, the left versus the right kind of thing. Because back then, poor whites and poor blacks had more in common with each other than each side really wanted to admit. Um, and the problem was the rich white power structures that were really running the show. And if you look at that again, I think we see a comparison of this today. And that was the dangerous truth of the Freedom Summer. That was the dangerous fact that existed through all of this. So the powerful people during all of this did what the powerful people do. They gave the poor whites one thing that they were trying to protect, one thing that nobody else could take from them, and that was being white. Now, I know there's a lot of people sitting out there right now saying, well, you don't know what you're talking about. You have no clue. Actually, I do, because history repeats itself, often with the same story, just worded a little bit differently. So I'm not saying by any means that the MAGA movement is anything akin to the civil rights movement. I don't think we should get our panties in a wad before the coffee even gets cold here. The civil rights movement was a fight for equal citizenship, right, amongst people. MAGA is just a modern populist movement, right? It's a popular grievance machine if you really want to look at the truth of it. And MAGA versus civil rights is a different moral universe, okay? And that's just a fact. Very different historical roles at play here. But the socio psychological machinery is still at play here underneath this. I mean, you still have the fear, the status panic, the manipulation of the working people that are out there. Um, those parts, if you know history and you know sociology, those parts look very familiar. Well, we're seeing it every day. Hospitals, psychiatric wards closing, Medicare, Medicaid cuts, funding cuts to rural programs, rural Head Starts, rural hospitals, rural medical funding. I mean, this is all happening here. And that often means much longer drives for people in rural communities, worse outcomes. It's harder to access health care. It's harder to access the things that you need. People are dying because healthcare is becoming too far away. Um, you're starting to see these towns close, these town resources dry up more and more and more. And but instead of making that the center of politics, we get another much more screaming narrative about it all, right? About the culture war garbage. And meanwhile, while all this culture war garbage is being yelled at us, we're forgetting the important things that we're losing. Um, in places like Corpus Christi, Texas, just down the road from me here, where I used to live, people are staring down a water crisis right now. while industry, while growth, while drought, political mismanagement, all that stuff, all collide like a drunk cattle or something, on a 2-lane road. While all this is colliding, the government's sitting around trying to find the blame, and that's what lawyers do. Lawyers try to find the blame in everything, and they try to convey that blame to the system, to the people. And there's no doubt there's a lot of blame to be had in a place like Corpus, but the problem still remains. Another thing you look at, I was looking up in San Antonio the other day, and Laurel Ridge was cutting some of their beds, psychiatric hospital. And psychiatric hospitals, we all know, are already strapped for beds. There's just not enough of them, right? But mental health systems in this country are going unfunded. Um, so what do we do? Where were we left with it, right? Where does the end of this? We send the police in, to monitor people. We put up these cameras all over the place, and we're selling data to everything. You know, hire more police, hire more guards, hire more border patrol, hire more this, hire more that. It's like the new TVA, right? But yet, how do we handle addictions? How do we handle homelessness? How do we handle the untreated psychosis on the streets, right? We send the police in there to handle that. And that just seems to be kind of the default answer. And then we kind of act shocked when it doesn't work. That's a real scary thought. So I think we over police because we undercare, and we build jails because we refuse to build infrastructure that works. We refuse to build systems that keep people from falling apart. And we know that it's not the wealthy and the powerful that's taking advantage of these systems. It's the everyday common man, especially in rural America. And these places in rural America are being caught up, being fed this line of BS about this culture war that really doesn't exist. But you're being sold down the river because they're taking everything from you and giving it to yourself or giving it to themselves while leaving you out to dry. You tell me. Which is affecting you more? So the truth is, a scared person does not naturally become wise, right? A scared person becomes tribal, okay? So when people feel like they're humiliated, when they're scared, when they're broke, when they're ignored, when they're culturally mocked, right? They become tribal, as we saw with the Ku Klux Klan, right? They start looking like a strong collective voice together. And somebody who says, I know who did this to you. And that voice makes sense. That voice ends up getting a lot of attention. And that voice doesn't have to be truthful. It doesn't have to be honest. It doesn't have to be right. It's just got to be saying, I know who did this to you. And the story of that is that person or that group of people is really poisonous to a society. But that poison works when people are thirsty. I want to say this. There's this allure that more and more poor people are wealthy today, and Americans are more wealthy than we've ever been. Actually, I think if you get out of your office and quit looking at the statistics, uh, and you get out here in everyday America, you start seeing a very different story. These people in deep rural Texas, deep rural Oklahoma, Appalachia, they're not better off than what they were 4, 5, 8 years ago, right? They're getting cut off insurance. They're getting cut off with all their funding. Unfunded mandates come down from these states like crazy. And so to sit here and say that we're better off than what we were um, before MAGA, I think is a crock of shit. But we're having to deal with the culture war, right? So they've come in and they've said, well, the trans people, the immigrants, the Chinese, the Swedish meatballs, the IKEAs of the world, and all this and that, are coming to keep you poor and coming to keep you down and coming to take your jobs and all this and that. Well, the truth is, it's their policies that are actually affecting you day to day in your life. And they're betting on the fact that you're too stupid to know the difference. Now, I'm not sitting here calling every MAGA voter stupid, and I'm not sitting here calling every MAGA voter a racist. That would be stupid of me. That's lazy. That's laziness, right? But this is what smug people say, I think, when they want applause or from people who just simply don't agree with them. I think it's plumb stupid. Most of those folks out there, these MAGA people, are not stupid people. They're not. They're actually very intelligent people, but they're tired. They're wore out. They're angry. They're scared. And they've been lied to by professional liars. And I mean that coming from Washington, D.C. to the pulpit. They're absolute professional liars. And the sin of all this is not being fooled. Okay? That's not the sin of it. The sin is that you learned to accept the damn machine instead of fighting back against the machine. The sin is, let me see how I won't put this. The sin is the machine that learned how to fool people for profit and for power. And that happened years ago during things like the Freedom Summer, and it's happening today. So the solution, you can offer a bridge, you can offer kumbaya, you can offer whatever, right? But the way out is not a lecture from the National Democrats, who only kind of discover rural America when they need a vote or when they need to try to get the electoral math in their favor. It's not another damn billionaire. It's not another Donald Trump. It's not another MAGA Republican pretending to be some kind of blue collar messiah that they're coming out here to rescue all of us. The way out is local. It's material. And it's plain spoken. Things like water, hospitals, schools, addiction treatment, better wages, housing, roads, ambulance response times, mental health beds, corrupt local contracts, people getting rich off of this, property taxes, insurance. These are things that people talk about whenever the cameras and whenever the talking points leave. And we've got preachers out there who drank this damn Kool-Aid about MAGA and immigrants and homosexuals and all this other stuff. When at the end of the day, let's just be damn honest. A homosexual or an immigrant or something like that really don't mean a hill of beans if you can't pay your damn bills and you can't get to a damn doctor and not be stuck with a $200,000 damn doctor bill. You think that damn homosexual means shit to you? Nope. If you laying there dying in bed and a damn transsexual doctor walks in there and you having a heart attack, you going to be mighty glad to see that transsexual doctor. You ain't going to give a shit. You probably going to be more happy to see that transsexual doctor than you will your preacher. Bet. So maybe we start there. Maybe we start right here where it hurts, okay? Maybe we start with what can be proven and not what can be philosophically political, Maybe we start with the fact that a man with a Trump flag and a woman with a Biden sticker both suffer from the same emergency. They both end up in the same emergency room when they need help, when their chest starts hurting, when they find in trouble to breathe. They both find themselves in the same boat. Now, I think that the Freedom Summer back in the 1960s in Mississippi, that taught us something, that America has spent 60 years trying to forget, you see. When poor and the working people stop believing the lies that are told by the powerful, the whole machine begins to shake and the whole machine begins to crumble. That's why they keep us divided. That's why they need our preachers out there preaching things like homosexuals, transsexuals, abortion, all this other stuff. That's why they want to keep you afraid of the things that you really don't understand. You see? That's why the enemy is always someone else instead of being the one that's closest to you. And the enemy, I think, is not the poor man down the road with a different yard sign. The enemy is the machine that convinced you and that guy that the other side is why your town is dying and why your life is actually getting worse. And there's going to be a few people out there who try to convince you that their life is actually getting better, and so therefore your life is actually getting better. It's kind of this, you spend your life chasing this goddamn dangling carrot, and you never quite catch the son of a bitch. And that's kind of how this works. So they put things on social media so they see people that look like you, kind of stuff like that, making a little bit of money on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, whatever. And that keeps you wanting to kind of chase that goddamn dangling carrot like I was talking about. That's fake. That's fake. And that's there to get you to believe that they ain't screwing you. So the Freedom Summer exposed kind of how race was used to keep the poor Americans divided. Now, 60 years later, rural America is watching hospitals close, water dry up, mental health systems collapse. Politicians, they're still selling fear of very small things for a very high price. The solution is not about MAGA voters, okay? That's not about hating these people. It's not about turning against these people. It's about understanding that the machine is using everyone for their own benefit. So it's not an attack on my people, on rural Americans. It's not. This is actually a defense of them because we're not standing up to defend ourselves. The simple question of this is who benefits when working people blame each other and they blame small, minor things that are blown up into very, very big problems instead of holding the people accountable for their actions and holding the party accountable for their actions. That's what happens when the shit hits the fan. So, you tell me. In the meantime, I'm going to go back, have my coffee. I'm going to go back to doing my thinking, doing my research. We'll catch you in the next video. Take care of yourself. And remember, don't believe the bullshit that comes out of these preachers and politicians' mouth. Think for yourself. Read the Bible for yourself. And think for yourself. Because the two biggest liars in town have become the politicians and the preachers. We'll see you.